the cuties and the 40% who have not joined this amazing community. Welcome to the Ethicsverse, the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. We got a real treat for you today. This is the place to be if you are all about making the world better by making our workplaces better. Today, we're going to be talking about moving from subtle acts of exclusion to intentional acts of inclusion. We've been talking about this a lot lately because, here at the Ethicsverse, we're trying to be part of this movement where we're marrying the, regulatory landscape and the compliance landscape to the lived employee experience so that the, cultures of integrity we're building feel more authentic, they feel more organic, and we're able to crowdsource more risk intelligence and just make our workplaces and bottom lines better. So like we always say, your network is your net worth. Neither are big enough. So drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat and really take advantage of this really amazing community that we're all a part of. This is the most collegial industry I've ever been in. There's somebody on this webinar today that's going through something that you've gone through. So reach out, expand that network, and improve the effectiveness of yourself inside your organization. Here's our link tree. Follow Ethico everywhere there is to be. So check out our YouTube channel. Chase has made that phenomenal. All of our past episodes of the Ethicsverse are up there. Episodes of the Ethics Experts, our award-winning podcast, is up there in a bunch of shorts. You can follow us on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, and just stay connected with us. Today, world famous Ethicsverse book giveaway. We're giving away Subtle Acts of Exclusion. This book is phenomenal. We're going to be talking about that today. The author, Michael Barron, is on here. Dr. Michael Barron is on here today. So you guys are going to love this. And because we love you so much, we're giving away 5 of these babies and happy to add Subtle Acts of Exclusion to the Ethico library. The ecosystem is your next-gen tool to help crowdsource that risk intelligence, to provide insights at the point of risk, and really stop doing a lot of this busy work that stresses you out and give you more comfort that the things you're doing are the right things and you're being more effective. So look at all these awards we won. A round of applause to the Ethico dev team, to the marketing team, to the account management and client success team for generating all these. If you're interested or you're thinking about changing in the next year, I encourage you to reach out to us. We have this, people are loving this thing. They're loving this free year of service that we're providing. It's our way to put our money where our mouth is and help to de-risk any transition you might be considering. So if you're sick of working for your tool and you want to get a tool that's going to help you be more effective and you want a year for free and maybe a free book in the mix, reach out to us for that. Of course, our Ethico library is just getting chock full. It's not quite as full as Michael's library back there, but it's getting there. Okay, so we got a bunch of great books here. You can click this, check out all we have to offer. Mary Shirley's book is still ripping off the shelves. Check out Christy Grant's Hart's new book, Your Year as a Wildly Effective Compliance Officer. Those are some of the recent fan favorites. For the recent giveaways. Here are a few podcasts to check out. Check out the most recent Great Women in Compliance podcast with Lisa and Hema. These guys are really putting out phenomenal content every week. Every single episode, I swear I listen to it and it's just, I'm taking something from it. I'm learning something from these great practitioners, these great women in compliance that they're able to pick their brains with. And I encourage you to check that out. Tom Fox's FCPA compliance report is there. And if you're bored, check out the GalloCast. Talked about the year free already. Here's me. How's it going? I forgot my steel suit. It's getting cleaned at the laundromat. But let's get a round of applause for Dr. Michael Barron. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Iris Inclusion. And he's a social scientist, and he draws on his own research in cultural anthropology and cognitive psychology to inform his current diversity, equity, and inclusion work. He is phenomenal. You guys are going to absolutely love him. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, y'all. I'm thrilled to be here to talk with you, and especially in this context. I'm going to probably talk too much, but Nick's going to stop me when I get going too much.
Yeah. So before we dive in, I don't know if anybody's been watching Love is Blind, but our one and only Jack O'Halloran, leader of the ethical marketing team, made his debut on the small screen. Okay. Jack was on the newest episode of Love is Blind. He is Johnny's friend. And look, I'm not trying to step on any toes here. I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm looking at this thing and I see 1 star here. Okay. Round of applause for Jack. I mean, let's get this guy a show as soon as possible. Okay.
That's
all right.
awesome.
Let's dive into the actual presentation now, Michael. The floor is yours.
All right, love it. Thanks, Nick. Okay, so first of all, I start every presentation on this topic with a big acknowledgement of my co-author, Dr. Tiffany Jana. They're an amazing DEI practitioner as well. We go back a long, long time. And, bringing the diversity of who we are together to make this book, not only in terms of our identities, but in terms of our professional backgrounds. As Nick mentioned, I'm a social scientist, bring all that research to bear in this book as well. And just always want to acknowledge Tiffany. And this collaboration is so rich, I think, because of the diversity that we bring to it. You can see this title looks a little different. This is the second edition of the book that just came out. So we're super excited about that. And enough about that. I just want to dive right in with some other voices now. People that are not me, not Tiffany. I've got 3 short clips to start off with that I want to show you. These are clips from interviews that I did with people on the street. And I just asked them, hey, what are some things that make you feel bad at work? And other people at work probably don't even realize it, right? So these are some of their answers. I'm going to play the first one now.
Professional. That's another thing that can be trying to be a compliment. You're very professional. Like, what does that mean? Like, as opposed to what? As opposed to who?
Okay, you're very professional, right? Some of you might be thinking, wait a minute, what's the problem with calling somebody professional? Isn't that a compliment? We're going to get into that. Why does that make her feel bad? Second one.
I think when I talk something about like a past boyfriend or something, like just in a normal conversation when I've sort of met people for the first time, or sometimes when I'm working through my work with community members or things like that, there's a pause, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to be received, but I actually don't care, and typically it's like, okay, that's fine, but there's usually always a pause first.
Right? Nobody said anything bad in this case. It just was a pause when he mentioned a past boyfriend. That's the level of subtlety we're talking about. And we'll get way more into that. Okay, here's the third one.
My physical ability to perform for my job, there's a physical requirement for my job as well. And despite how well I score on it, and I do pretty well, I'm almost at like a perfect, it's always, oh, well, you did that pretty well for a female. You did a lot of that, especially for a female. And it's like, I mean, thank you, I guess. But at the same time, it's like, I'm not like, I'm just trying to do my best, and like, it shouldn't matter if I am a female.
Again, something you might think is a compliment, right? You did that really well, but usually when that's followed with a qualification like that's usually not a great way to do a compliment. So we're going to get into all of this. But first wanted to ask you, has something like this ever happened to you before? Just go ahead and put it in the chat. You don't have to be specific about what happened, but something that made you feel bad because of who you are, whether that's race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, disability or ability, religion, age, like any dimension of difference you could think about. Go ahead and put that into the chat. Something like this
happened to you before, Michael?
Yeah, it's happened to me before for sure. It's usually, we call it a subtle act of exclusion when it's related to part of your identity that is a marginalized identity. So something, for my identity is I'm Jewish, which is not the most common religion in the US. And so oftentimes subtle acts of exclusion will happen to me around religion. And that's when I experience it. What about you?
So I think it's happened to me before. I don't have a graduate degree, and when we were fundraising, there were a couple of potential investors that were wouldn't kind of even meet with me because I didn't have that pedigree, Okay.
Yeah.
So this is,
yeah.
that's a pedigree issue for me, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, and thank you for all your comments. This definitely in line with a lot of the groups that I talk to. Like, yes, this has happened. Sometimes, yes, all the time, depending on who you are and how you show up. So thank you for sharing that.
There are some good ones in the chat here. Carly said, I love this. Hey, Carly, thanks for this. You're a good negotiator. I didn't expect you to be so aggressive. Ageism is in here. Questioned about taking off work for a Jewish holiday. I mean, that's crazy. Yes, race, white but Hispanic, and religion, Catholic. Again, kind of attributing to being female. Blonde comments, jokes are so much fun. It feels a little sarcastic. It seems like it's not that much fun. What else?
Yep. Gender, age.
Oh, how about this one? How about this one? I mean, again, what those few videos showed was that like there's not this intention behind someone feeling excluded from that kind of a comment or that kind of compliment even. Marge, hey Marge, this is a great comment. Given where I live, someone asked what my husband did for a living and I don't have a husband. They made that assumption.
Right. Assuming you have a husband, assuming, assumptions of heterosexuality happen all the time. In that vein of compliments, I see Joanna, but you have a very interesting accent, as if that's a compliment.
Or how about this one? You're very knowledgeable for not having a degree. Thanks for that, Jennifer.
Right. Yeah, you're doing great for a nurse. Yeah, these are great examples. And so we're going to talk about all this. Now, what if I asked you, have you worried that you've been the one to say something like this that made somebody feel bad? Whether it's a very particular example that you can think of, sometimes even from years ago, or whether it's just a general feeling that things are sensitive these days. And that feeling is out there, and people do sometimes feel like they're walking on eggshells. I worked with a veterinary hospital where some people felt like they couldn't say the word black lab when a black lab dog came in for treatment. That's how sensitive they thought things were. Of course, the Black people working there had no problem with anybody saying black lab. And in fact, that felt pretty patronizing and performative. But they weren't talking about it, which I guess is kind of the key. And we're going to get into all that. So I see lots of yeses, definitely in line with what we're seeing when we talk to folks as well. And then what if I asked you, well, do you know what you would say if something like this happens tomorrow, right? How would you turn that from exclusion to inclusion? And that's usually where we lose people, right? Sometimes people are like, yeah, I've done this and I could do it and I feel confident. Sometimes people say, yeah, depends on who the person was, right? Maybe I could do it. But for a lot of people, this is like, no, I really don't know. This is not something I would report, right? So, somebody called me professional, right? That's not something I'm going to report to HR, and I don't know how I would handle it. And so that happens a lot. So I'm excited to share with you first some deeper understanding about these things and why they're such a big deal. But then also, and of course, we don't have enough time to do it completely, but just some tips for how do you have a conversation about this? How do you address it if it happens? Okay, so just half a step back, reminding you what inclusion and exclusion are, right? Like inclusion is a feeling. Inclusion is when people feel welcomed, valued, respected, heard, understood, supported, safe, right? That's when people feel that, not when you think it in your head. Not when you think, yeah, I don't judge anyone, so everybody should feel great when they interact with me. Well, that's nice, but inclusion is not a spectator sport. We have to be active about it, right? I know you all are very inclusive of the people you're inclusive of, right? But are you with everyone equally? And that's where some things get in our way, bias and other things. So that's inclusion, right? You all know this. Inclusion isn't just nice for an individual, but it matters a ton for an organization's performance. And this is one study. I could have grabbed hundreds of studies showing the same thing, right? Higher growth, faster to market. better profitability, innovation, better decisions, impact on performance. And it's not just by a little bit, it's by a lot, right? Luckily, the thing that makes people feel good is the same thing that helps us work better together. That's kind of amazing that those two things go together. Now, the opposite of inclusion is, of course, exclusion. And, you know, let's be real. Sometimes it is explicit and it is intentional. It's not all subtle. Sometimes that happens. But that's usually not what gets in our way at work, right? I bet, I don't know how many of you are here, 240 something people here. I bet none of you woke up this morning and thought, how am I going to make people feel terrible today? Right? I mean, maybe one or two of you, but probably not most of you, right? And so what happens at our workplaces is this more passive exclusion. Like we're not actively including everyone to the same degree. And so people feel excluded passively. That subtle exclusion. That exclusion can be unintentional, as some of those examples showed. It can be expensive. I just saw a study estimating that $1.05 trillion were lost it just last year in American companies because of exclusion, right? People leaving the organization, retention issues, not performing up to their highest degree. So it can be expensive and it can be painful. And I kind of mean that literally. They do these studies where they give people subtle exclusion prompts and they look at what part of the brain lights up, right? Like on a brain scan. It's the same part that lights up when we experience physical pain. That's how much it hurts. And when that part of the brain is activated, it gets in the way of all sorts of things. Our perceptual awareness, our mental clarity, our problem solving, our decision making. And when it happens consistently, which it does for many people, it can cause mental and physical health problems. That's how much of a big deal it is for people. Then, of course, it's bad for organizations too, right? When people feel that exclusion, what do? Everybody's talking about quietly quitting these days. Just you show up and do the minimum, but you don't give it your all. That's what happens when people feel that exclusion. They also might just actually quit, leave the organization. They might isolate themselves, not collaborate as well. They might withhold information, remain silent when they see problems, or even share publicly about the exclusion they're feeling. None of these is good for teams. None of these is good for organizations. And it can happen so fast. It doesn't take years to build up this kind of exclusion. It can happen in a minute.
Well, yeah, it can flip a switch and somebody can feel totally excluded and then totally disengaged. And, you know, you talked about this $1 trillion. That's like over 4%. That's over 4% of the US GDP was wasted, eliminated as a result of this thing. And we talk about this thing all the time. And all of this stuff fits together, right? Our job is to crowdsource this risk intelligence. We need the human sensors in our organization engaged to do that. Organizations are paying out 100% of people's salaries, and people's disengagement causes them to not push their foot down in the gas. That disengagement stems from all those things, and the results of that disengagement were all on the last slide, right? They don't speak up, they don't participate, they don't feel that belonging, they don't engage to the level that we would like them to engage, and that cascades into worse business results. So when ethics and compliance, or when HR can lean into that opportunity it has to be that circulatory system of the organization, it's not just about risk. It's about creating this environment and creating this culture that people can really be a part of. And when that happens, all of these positive externalities really start to cascade across the whole organization, and it's very multiplicative. So I love this topic, and I love that last slide. I just think it touches so many of the pain points that we feel in our organizations when we feel like we're a goalie with no defenders, or we feel like we're, swimming upstream, or, the weight of the world is on our shoulders. It's due to things like this. It's the lack of connectedness that individuals, human beings in the organization have to the mission of the organization. And just like, sorry to keep rambling, one more point. Shut off, it can turn back on. It can be, we can show that your place is a place that is worthy of people's allegiance, belonging, engagement, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's as if like you had this sort of first phase in workplaces where like there was explicit harassment, teasing, and that was certainly no good. And it's almost like a lot of organizations, they decided to try to stop that by just not engaging or not talking about anything, right? Like, oh, we can't talk about this stuff. And so then we get this silence and this distance that is still not getting us to the phase we need to get to, right? All right, so this is good stuff. Now let's, you might have heard these called microaggressions before. Lots of people know that word in this space. Actually, though, if you go out on the street, most people have not heard that word before. It's been around since the 1970s based on the work of Chester Pierce. Lots of different definitions. I think kind of a simple definition is when you have a disconnect between an intention and an impact. So my intention might be, what I'm trying to do might be to bond with you, to ask a question, to compliment you, to get it right. That's what I'm trying to do. And yet it lands in the exact opposite way: hurt, pain, exclusion, or stress. Right? So that's what people have meant by microaggressions. And of course, since the term's been around for a long time, we've got lots of research on microaggressions. This is from a McKinsey report. There's just so many out there. This one specifically is looking at women in the workplace, and they asked about these microaggressions: having your judgment questioned in your area of expertise, needing to provide more evidence of your competence than others do, being addressed in a less than professional way, being mistaken for someone at a much lower level, your work contributions are ignored, hearing demeaning remarks, right? Then you look at the numbers and the size of the circles, and that's how often each of these demographic groups experience that one kind of microaggression during a normal course of business. Not like, have you ever experienced this? During a normal course of business. And these are huge numbers, right? In the teens, 20s, 30s, 40s. Not only for women, but especially for women. Not only for Black women, but especially for Black women, right? And so we can see, if you take all of these and the other, hundreds or thousands of microaggressions or subtle acts of exclusion that are out there, you can see just how frequently this is happening to people.
Look at what, hey, Wendy, as usual, Wendy dropping fire in the chat. She said, I prefer the term identity-related aggression rather than microaggression. While the action might be micro, the impact is anything but micro.
It's Wendy, wait till you see the slides I'm about to show you. You're anticipating.
Unplanned segue. You see how organic the ethics-verse is? I mean, this is phenomenal. All right, go ahead.
I'm loving it. In that same McKinsey study, you might think, oh, surely we've made tons of progress. In that same McKinsey study, they looked at where are we making progress with women in the workplace? And when it comes to microaggressions, no real change they found. So here we have this situation where they're causing all this harm to people, to teams, to organizations. They're happening all the time. We're not making progress. And so, when companies would realize that, they'd call us in to do microaggressions trainings. And I will tell you, of all the trainings I do, and I do a lot of trainings, the microaggressions trainings were horrible. And I'm going to tell you why. I got 3 common reactions, and these are strong reactions when we would come in to do a microaggressions training. The first was, we give an example of a microaggression. Maybe it's, you're so professional, or probably the most common one, telling a Black person, you're so articulate, you're so well-spoken. Well, what's the reaction we get? You can't even call that a microaggression, because I wasn't trying to be aggressive. I was trying to give you a compliment. And people would dig their heels in like you've never seen before. So we can't even talk about the thing because the word is getting in our way. Now, what's the other part of that word? Like Wendy said, right? Micro. Micro means small and unimportant. Well, it does not feel very micro when this is happening to you. And remember that slide about the pain that this is causing, the mental and physical health problems? This is not a small, unimportant issue, right? And so that was not helpful. Also, imagine I've got a training that I invite you to, or I make you do because it's mandatory. And I have subtly told you it's about something not important because it's micro. How invested are you in really doing something about it? How invested are you in really making a change? You're like, oh my gosh, I've got big things to worry about. I got to sit through this not important workshop. And so there was probably a period of about 6 months where I was muttering under my breath, like, this word is getting in our way of the work.
Right.
I know we can do this work. Why is this word getting in our way? And so I'd kind of mumble, like, somebody's got to think of a new word for this thing. And I was talking to Tiffany one day, and Tiffany was feeling the same thing. And Tiffany was like, why don't we do it? And so that's what led to the writing of this book. Of course, we started out brainstorming. Well, what would we call these things, right? We had a long list. Some were trying to be clever or jargony. In the end, we just thought, let's just call these things what they are. They're subtle. Doesn't mean they feel subtle, but the subtlety is what makes it so they keep happening. So we don't report them. So we don't know what to do about it, right? They're acts and not intentions. They're words or behaviors. And we should be able to talk about that without making people feel ashamed, like they're being called a bad person or something. And then let's name the problem right in the term itself. It's creating the opposite of inclusion. It's creating exclusion. So that's how we landed on subtle acts of exclusion and SAE for short. Luckily, there aren't too many SAE acronyms out there. The first time I did a presentation for a hospital administration, they told me, oh, SAE is actually an acronym we use. And at first I thought, oh no. And they said, it kind of works, actually. It means significant adverse event. I thought, that actually kind of works.
It does work, yeah.
And so this is key.
Pardon me, Michael.
Yeah,
I love the acronym. I think it does solve a lot of the objections that naturally come from it on either side that people have experienced it. How has the reaction been as you've started to do this work where you've replaced microaggression, this term that everybody has some kind of aversion, intellectual aversion or whatever to, with this more inclusive term?
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's like something that has been stuck for so long that people, when you're experiencing these and you just feel like, I'm never going to get progress on this, I've just got to figure out a way to deal with it. When you get a new kind of framework that all of a sudden lets people kind of just relax a little bit about it and start to engage with it for real, it's like this relief that people feel like, oh my gosh, we might actually make progress on this. Like everything from like a joy to tears, like that's amazing. But not just for the people who experience the subtle acts of exclusion all the time, the people who have felt like they're walking on eggshells, all of a sudden they get some relief too. Like, oh, it's like light bulbs, like seeing those little videos, and I'll show you a couple more in a minute. But the videos, it just helps people see, oh, it's not like I'm necessarily a bad person. It's just I've done these things before and I could do it differently. Or you have people who want to be allies but don't know how to do it. And microaggression kind of sets them up for this like confrontational thing that they don't feel like they could do. But when the pressure is taken off and we just have a more neutral on-ramp for people that feel like they can engage in the conversation in a different way. So it's been amazing. And organizations have adopted this framework wholesale, like changing policies and procedures and the way they talk and the culture. It's been so satisfying and amazing, actually.
Well, and that allyship thing is such a catch-22 that people find themselves in, because to your point, just that term is such the antithesis of somebody who has that sort of inherent allyship, right? They're not trying to be aggressive. They're trying to be inclusive. But the fear of like kind of walking in the dark prevents many people that are, to your point from before, like so well intending from even like paving that bridge over that chasm. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's part of this. It's part of where we are right now as a society. My gosh, we've got so many words that have just become these hot button words, and we're not talking about the thing anymore. We're just like taking sides in this polarizing way that's entirely unhelpful. And so can we just talk about the stuff and like come together to make things better for everybody? And so this is helping. It's framing the issue in a way that helps people do that, which is great. All right, so I want to tell you all too about one of the key parts that we looked into, which was
I'm sorry. One other point, because there was a
Yeah.
comment in the chat about number 7 here. You are a curiosity. How,
Yeah.
again, it's this kind of catch-22 thing, because sometimes you're actually curious about somebody and you want to understand where they're from. How do you, what tactics do you have around that kind of a thing so somebody doesn't feel like they're like at, Ripley's Believe It or Not, or like an oddity or something, you know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah, perfect. Let me address that. So these are the things, when a subtle act of exclusion happens, right? What's being said on the surface might be something like, you're so professional, you're so articulate, right? That's what's being said. But what's being felt might be one of these 8 things. These are the most common that we found when we looked at all the research and our own experiences. You don't belong. Right? So this happens all the time with Asian Americans. Where are you from? And somebody will say, oh, I'm from, New Jersey. Oh, well, where are you really from? Or where are you from before that? Or where your parents are from, right? On the surface, it's just curiosity, to your point. But what it's feeling like, maybe for that person is, oh, I don't belong, right? So you don't belong. You're a threat. You're inadequate. You're not normal. You're invisible. You're not an individual. You're a curiosity. And that's in the bad way. There are still people out there touching Black women's hair, right? That is making people feel, oh, you're a curiosity. You're a burden. None of these are good things to feel. These are terrible things to feel. Here you are just trying to go about your day and do your thing. And then all of a sudden somebody makes a comment that makes you feel like one of these or multiple. And they would deny they ever even said it because they didn't exactly say it, right? And so this is going to help us get a language for addressing these things when we can put words to something more nuanced. It's not just you're being racist, you're being sexist, but it's something more nuanced about what it's making me feel or what it might make somebody else feel. So we'll get into that too. There's so much I want to tell you about. I want to show you 2 more.
Quick question from Carly. Sorry to interrupt. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Or should I give you the question? Yeah. So she said, as a bystander, what's the most effective way to interject when you see this happening? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Hold that thought. I've got a whole slide on it. Great question. Okay. So what I want to do now is show you 2 quick clips again, but this time I want you to think about from that person's perspective, which of these 8 things might they be feeling when this happens? Okay, here's the first one.
Internet usage. Oh, well, you millennials are always on the phone. You millennials, you don't ever look up from your apps.
Or sometimes we hear, oh, you're one of the good millennials. You're not like those other millennials. Go ahead and put it in chat. What do you think that is making her feel?
Yeah. The only apps I don't look up from are appetizers. You know what I'm saying?
What do y'all think? Which one of these? Or perhaps multiple?
So as those are loading into the chat, I want to share something that, where is that comment? I'm sorry. Let me just grab that real quick. Christine. Hey, Christine. More gems from Christine here. Every week, she's got something great to say. Instead of digging their heels in, people need to take a step back and understand it's not about their intent. It's about how their words are received.
Absolutely.
Some answers are starting to come in here.
Yeah, not an individual, right? Young, you're not an individual. You're not normal. Yep, you're not an individual. Inadequate, not normal. Not an individual. 3 and 6, yeah, not an individual, inadequate, right? And is it the case that it's one of you is right and the rest of you are wrong? Of course not, right? It could be all of these at the same time. But here's the key. We can imagine, but we don't necessarily know because she'd have to tell us, right? And I'm sure y'all have realized this by this point in life. Human beings are kind of complicated. So she might feel it as a subtle act of exclusion, but a different millennial might not. That's fine. It doesn't invalidate the fact that she said it makes her feel bad because a different millennial said, I really don't care. That does not make me feel bad at all. That's fine. Also, she might feel it as a subtle act of exclusion one day, but not the next day for whatever reason. she might feel it as a subtle act of exclusion when one person says it to her, but not when a different person says it to her, because they have different relationships. And so sometimes people want a list of like, what are the 50 things I can always say and the 50 things to never say? And I wish it were that simple. But just like that one comment said, it's about understanding how our words and actions can impact people, and they impact different people differently. And they impact different people differently at different times. And so we just have to be attuned to that human connection, which makes it so complicated. Okay. Oh, yes. Good. We already did this. Here's another video.
And so they won't say anything, and we could kind of notice that, whether that's walking on a sidewalk and they jump out of the way, or if they kind of like, flatten themselves up against the wall so we don't run into them, and we still kind of brush up against them, that kind of thing, where a simple hi would probably give me more of an audio cue to walk around or greet as well, or avoid, the collision that may happen, or whatever it is that they're scared of.
So here he is walking down the hall at work, and people silently flattening themselves up against the wall to get out of his way. What do you think that might be making him feel? Go ahead and put that in chat. While you are doing that, there are a couple of comments I see that are great. Robin, there is a no list. There is no list. I read that wrong, but there is also kind of a no list. I mean, there's some things that are just good to avoid. I love that. Some things that are good to avoid. There's another comment in here. I hope I'm saying it right. Faisal, just keep to yourself and don't joke about anything. Aren't we being too sensitive? And I want to address that because that's a common thing that people might feel. And the answer I would say to that is no. Like, what makes people feel bad makes people feel bad. And so there are things that are going to make you feel bad, and other people would be surprised by that. So this is about just listening to what makes people feel bad, because it feels bad to them and it impacts their inclusion and their performance at work. And so we're getting just more awareness about how what we say and do can make people feel bad, and leaning into that. And there's usually such a simple fix, right? Like in this video, right? What did he say? If he just said hi to me walking down the hall, that would solve everything. Like, that would help me get down the hall better. I might have a question I need to ask you related to work. And so that would help me. And if you didn't realize that beforehand, then that's a light bulb for you. Like, oh, maybe that's a better strategy. And there's so many great comments, and again, we wouldn't necessarily know, but in our interview, he told me, like, look, I know people are trying to help me. I know they're trying so hard to help me. And it still makes me feel bad. It still makes me feel like I'm a burden, or like I'm a curiosity, or like I'm not normal, or like I'm invisible, right? And this is such a great example to think about the spectrum of these things that's out there. On one side of the spectrum, you have people really trying to probably cause harm to others. And then on this side of the spectrum, you have people trying so hard to help, right? Not intending anything bad. And of course, there's a whole big gray area, which is a lot of what the book's about, the confusing examples, the ones that keep happening because people don't really understand them or know what to do about them.
So there, back to that comment about aren't we being overly sensitive? I think it's kind of a question of like where the focus for the joking is. If the joking is for yourself, well then somebody's insensitivity is going to be kind of, raining on your parade. You know what I'm saying? But if the joking around is a way to connect with somebody else, well, then it's kind of a function of like, is that joking appropriate with that audience? And like, some people can take jokes and some people can't. I'm somebody that, people can give a hard time to. I like that. That's funny to me. There are other people that don't like that they don't connect that kind of way. So that would be crazy for me to put my own self above that other person to feed that need I have to joke around and give somebody a hard time. Like, who is it for? Is it for yourself to make yourself comfortable, or is it for the other person? And I think if we have a true culture of servanthood, or a culture of, others focus, where we're trying to build authentic trust, well, then that focus should be shifted to the other person. And we should be willing to accommodate and serve each other to build this type of an environment that people can feel belonging in and feel a part of in an authentic, sort of organic way,
Absolutely. Well, and this is a great time for me to mention another key concept, which is psychological safety. And lots of people have very joking relationships with their close friends outside of work, with their family outside of work, but not everyone feels psychological safety to the same degree in work. And so the jokes, if you don't feel the safety, they are not going to land the same as they do for somebody who feels a lot of safety. And so that's super important to keep in mind as well. Now,
that's
these
so
subtle
true.
acts, yeah, right? Now, they happen for all sorts of reasons. First, you can't know everything about everyone in the world, right? You just don't know. Maybe you haven't walked next to a blind person and seen what it takes to get down the hall. You just don't know, right? Or maybe there's a lack of comfort. And certainly a lot of examples of subtle acts of exclusion are when people are trying to overcompensate for a lack of comfort. So like a guy in a wheelchair was telling me, people are always making this joke, oh, don't go getting a speeding ticket with that thing. And he's like, look, I get it. You're trying to show me you're comfortable with my wheelchair. It actually makes me feel like all you see is my wheelchair and not me. And that's a throwaway comment for you. I've already heard that joke 5 times today. Like, what the heck, right?
I had a buddy with a wheelchair, and this other guy asked him, oh, you have to grease those wheels? And, I don't know if the guy was like just being curious or what, but it made him feel so silly about it. He's like, yeah, I have to grease these wheels. That's how I have to keep them lubricated,
Right.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we have biases. Maybe we have a conscious bias, if we can voice that it's conscious, and then we have biases we don't even know about. So I have certainly had people say to me, I just love knowing about people and where they're from and their heritage. That's okay. But maybe there's a bias there. When you ask one person where they're from and they say New Jersey, you go, oh, cool. And when you ask another person where they're from and they say New Jersey, you go, oh, where were you from before that? Or where are your parents from? Or where are you really from? There's a bias there about who really belongs. And so that's important to recognize. Okay, I want to get to what do we do about these things before we run out of time. I've got 2 key slides coming up after this. This one here, just imagine any subtle act of exclusion scenario at work. There's usually these 3 roles that happen. There's the person that said or did the thing. We could call them the initiator. There's, not the perpetrator, the initiator. There's a person or group that is impacted, that it's about. They might not even be in the same room when it happens, but it's about them or their group. You could call them the subject, not the victim, the subject. And then there's usually somebody else who sees it happen or hears it happen. We can call them the potential ally, because maybe they say something about it and maybe they don't. That potential ally is really important, right? It would kind of be messed up if Tiffany and I wrote this book and we said, here, there are all these subtle acts of exclusion. Now, those people who have been most excluded and most marginalized, now it's your responsibility to speak up and educate everyone and say something about this. That is not what we're saying. In fact, what we're saying is, hey, understanding so that you can take on some of that risk instead of the person who's been most impacted. So this slide is all about those people who want to speak up and say something. The next slide is all about what if you said it and you're getting the feedback, okay? So it's quick. I'm going to go over this way too quick, but you'll get the main idea. So the first thing, if you want to say something, is getting in a mindset of not calling out another person, right? You're racist, you're sexist. That might feel great on Twitter. Probably not your best strategy if you want to work with that person well. Instead, call in that person while you call out the behavior, right? Call in the person, call out the behavior. And here's some ways you can do it. It's not easy. It's hard, right? Especially if you don't have a lot of practice. It's hard. So here's some strategies. What pause the action means is just sometimes something happens and you try to figure out what's the perfect thing to say. And by the time you figure it out, the moment's passed and you end up not saying anything. And so what pause the action means is just say something before you even have any idea what you want to say about it. Hey, hold on. Can we pause? I don't even know yet why I'm feeling this, but could we meet up for coffee tomorrow and talk about it? I need some time to think, right? It's just about saying something and then going ahead and figuring out what do you even want to say. Assuming good intent, if the intent was good. We are not saying sugarcoat it if somebody's trying to harm you. If somebody's trying to harm you and with intent, that's a different conversation. This is if there is good intent. Just making that clear. I know you didn't mean anything by this. That helps. And then instead of like an adversarial relationship, think of it as something we can do together. We can explore it together. Hey, this thing just happened. Could we talk about it? Could we explore this? Can I share with you? And then use that language to not point fingers at the other person being a racist or a sexist or an ableist, but explain the impact using that language. Hey, when you said that, it made me feel invisible. Or if it happened to somebody else, again, you're not going to know what it made them feel, but you can imagine, just like you did with those videos, that might make someone feel not normal or like they don't belong. And so those are strategies for speaking up. Then what if you're the person getting this feedback?
Let me pause you there, please.
Pause.
So what I love, if you can go back. So what I love about this approach is that it is kind of an inarguable approach. Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Nobody can argue with the way that you make them feel. But they can argue with your resultant label. Or if you come at them and say, you are X, Y, or Z because of this feeling that I have, that is a way to sort of drive division. But with this approach, you're assuming, you're pausing in the moment, right? So you're not letting it fester. You're being candid, right? Candor is kind. You're being candid about this, and you're assuming the positive intent that this person was not, had the intention of making you feel a certain way. Hey, let's explore this together. I love that of pulling them in. And it's sort of a separation between the individual and the behavior kind of inherent in that, right? And then finally explaining the impact is an opportunity to raise their awareness about this feeling that whatever comment that's in question evoked in you. That is such a constructive way to raise awareness and maintain the allyship with somebody else who might unintentionally, again, assuming positive intent, might have unintentionally kind of put their foot in their mouth without knowing it.
Yeah, and it's not just for workplaces. I mean, this is a connection strategy for any relationship you have, whether that's a romantic partner, a family member, a friend, somebody that you work with, of course. Like, this is just a good connection building practice. It doesn't look the same every time you do it, right? Sometimes you can't do it in the moment. And that's like, it's just, there's no one size fits all strategy, but these are just some good best practice guidelines that you can adapt to your own style and your particular context. All right, now the people that are getting the feedback, and I hope every one of us is in this position of getting feedback, because we're all going to say things that inadvertently make somebody feel bad if we're trying to connect with people who are different from us, right? So the first strategy here is just getting in a mindset of gratitude. I mean, my gosh, here you are. You're trying to be the best person you can be. You're trying to be the best colleague you can be. And it's hard, and you don't know everything about everyone. And somebody has gift wrapped a way for you to be more inclusive with them. What a gift that really is. And so you can thank them. Like, I'm so glad you said something, right? You can even invite the feedback. Like if you're running a team, hey team, I know I'm not going to be perfect, and I'm going to say things that are going to make you feel bad. I want you to tell me, right? Now, is that easy? No. You might feel some defensiveness. You might think, no, I didn't mean it like that. No. You want to defend your intention. And I urge you, don't do that. If you defend your intention, the other person will not feel heard. So just try to understand that impact more. Can you tell me more about this? Help me understand. Or they're probably already telling you, just listen. And don't listen from your own filters. Like, that wouldn't have made me mad. I don't see what the big deal is. Doesn't matter. It's not about you. It's about them. And they don't have the same life as you, the same experiences. So just listen. Then using that opportunity.
And who knew you get a little bonus marriage seminar today? This works everywhere.
I know. It's a hard context to use it, but it's good advice.
So I got a quick question here from Trinity, unless you want to, do you mind if I ask it real quick? Trinity, thanks for saying this. So we talked about how someone can raise their hand and say, hey, let's kind of talk about how this made me feel. We talked about how somebody who's receiving that feedback should receive it to make that constructive and encourage that person, encourage that sort of connectedness, thank them for speaking up, right? To kind of reinforce the inclusion that perhaps they intended. But then Trinity said, what about if somebody, essentially hasn't seen this slide and you're trying to give that feedback? How do you handle the response? You're too sensitive when you share something that made you feel a certain way.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, often when somebody, this works best when entire teams, departments, organizations participate in the training, practice the different roles, are aware of it all, then it works best. If that is not the case, I usually tell people, give some context before you give the feedback. Like even as far as like, hey, I went to this seminar the other day. I learned about this thing, subtle acts of exclusion. I'm committed to saying something when something makes me feel bad that's subtle, or when I think it might make somebody else feel bad. In that spirit of giving feedback, can I share with you this, right? And so just giving that little bit of context that can be helpful instead of just launching right in. That's how I would answer that.
Great answer. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And so then just finishing up here, when you're the one getting the feedback, you really trying to learn from it. Like, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to Google, why shouldn't I have said this? I bet you're not the first person to ever say it. And so you'll get amazing things that pop right up that you can read. You can do some self-exploration. It's a great time to think about, I wonder if I have, just a tiny tangent on unconscious bias trainings or implicit bias trainings, where they always tell you, this is one of the solutions they tell you, just take your unconscious biases and make them conscious. And I want to pull my hair out and say, how are you supposed to do that if they're unconscious? But if you ever get feedback that you didn't mean to, but something you said made someone feel bad, that's your window. That's your window to think, oh my gosh, I wonder if there's a bias that I didn't even know about that made it come out like this, right? That's your moment. And then, of course, take these moments seriously. It's usually not a quick one and done conversation if it's a big deal. And so just following up, checking back in with people. You don't need to, by the way, overly apologize and grovel and make the other person now take care of you. That's not it. Just sincere effort to do better, and keep the focus on them. That's really important. And what's key here is that you can't go back in time and change what you said. All you can do is fix what you say and do moving forward. And even though you messed up, if you take the feedback seriously and address it, you can build more trust. You can build a closer relationship. It's not over. Like, you can get closer to the other person by taking it seriously. If you don't take it seriously, yeah, you're going to have distance. You're going to have resentment. You're going to have a lack of trust if you don't take it seriously. And by the way, if you give someone feedback about something like this and they don't take it seriously or don't care, we're starting to move away from good intent in my mind, right? And so that's how this is constantly shifting all the time. Okay. Whew. And of course, the end goal of all this, right, is that instead of those terrible things that people feel, everyone feels you're understood, you're valued, you're respected, you are seen and heard as the individual that you are, and you're safe. You're safe to make mistakes, to share your ideas, to be yourself at work. Okay, what questions came up in the few minutes we have left?
So I got a good question from Mariana. Hi there. How can we encourage that shift towards it's not about the intent, but how the other person feels about it? How do we make that shift, across a team or across a division or, the broader company? Yeah. How do you encourage that kind of a cultural shift?
Yeah, it takes work. I mean, that's the business we are in, is shifting culture. And that means like working with people, working with leaders, working with managers, helping people really understand this. Because too often we just jump into these, like telling people what to do or giving them platitudes or patronizing kind of admonishments. And we don't build the deeper understanding for why this matters. What's going on here, right? Imagine I just came up to you out of the blue and said, like, stop doing these microaggressions. You'd be like, what are you even talking about?
Right.
But we just build some deeper understanding about what we're talking about here. And then people get it in a different way. Then it's not a fight with people to do it because it makes sense what we're talking about. So a lot of it is building a deeper understanding and putting a focus on the culture. Too many people they just don't give enough attention to the culture. I see people thinking, well, we do pretty good most of the time, so our culture is pretty good. And they don't realize that that's not how culture works. Culture is way better thought of as like, not what you do most of the time, but what's the worst thing that we do that's tolerated? That's kind of what sets the culture, right? And so just putting that attention on it is important.
That's an interesting definition. The worst of what we accept is kind of the perimeter of it or something, or so I love this comment from Carly. I think this is great. In general, I don't think it's a good idea to make jokes about marginalized identity / appearance in the workplace, even if you think they will take it well. It's just not worthwhile.
Yep. Agreed. Agreed. And one of the strategies too is just building relationships and trust with people. Just putting in the work to connect with other people at work like it's your job, because it kind of is, and then you have a different level of trust and understanding. And then the joking is, you either know better what to joke about or what not to joke about, or it's just so much more natural because you have a real relationship.
Yeah. And, I also think that, I think if you're trying to be super inclusive, you're going to step on toes. Then the summary of this is like, well, just walk on eggshells. I don't think that's the point here. The point here is what Dr. Michael just said. It's about making authentic connection. And if we have a culture in our organization that's organically, authentically based on actual integrity, well, then there's a bunch of connected tissue in there, and that all of that connective tissue is all these authentic relationships. And so just like when you're getting to know somebody, you might step on their toes, or as you get to know somebody, like if you're just dating somebody for the first time, some people are very, they want you to be on time, right? So as you get to know those things, and as you get to understand those sensitivities and where those boundaries are, you're going to step over those things. And this is not all about never violating that and never stepping over something, but I think it is about cleaning it up and being aware that you might be stepping over something or stepping over one of those lines, and letting that awareness coupled with your own humility cause you to say, hey, I need to go and clean this up. So if you say something that, you see somebody's demeanor change, you should be open to learning, understanding, actually empathizing with that person, and apologizing if you did something unintentionally. I can't tell you how many times I'm like the foot and mouth guy. So I've done this 1,000 times, and I just think like you have to be able to go and apologize to somebody if something you said could be damaging to their experience, because, like Michael said, it is our job. Our job is to create a team. We have to help reinforce a culture of actual engagement and actual belonging. And that can't be done authentically. That has to, some CEO can't just bang a gavel on the table or walk around with a bullhorn telling people to connect and, feel included. That has to actually happen organically and come up from the ground level. You know what I mean? So there are going to be errors here. And I just think if we can engage a lot more authentically and cut ourselves some slack to say, hey, I'm sorry if I messed something up, and I'm open to understanding what your plight might be or what your lived experience might be, I think the speed to authentic connection is going to be a lot higher,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And just, even learning about people, not in the sense, don't go up to people like, hey, I heard we should learn about people. So what's your sexuality and how old are you and what's your religion and all that stuff. That's not it. But just asking questions like, hey, what, we worked together a little while, but like, what's something about you that you would want me to know so we could work even better together? And just opening up a space for people to share what they want as they want and as they're comfortable. And then really listening to that and building those connections, whether it's, you're a leader and you're doing that on your one-on-ones with your team, or just doing it with your colleagues. That's just so helpful for building that trust and connection.
Yeah. Wendy just said the comment, but how am I supposed to do that is my problem with most trainings. Don't tell me what to do. Help me understand how to do it, how to implement. And I think that, that's what I really enjoyed about this session today. We talked about this topic. We explored it from a couple of different angles. We heard a couple of different voices, and then we got super tactical on, how we can start to implement this. And what I would encourage you guys to remember is that you're never going to wave a magic wand and change all of this stuff. Changing a culture is like building a bonfire. That's not like flipping a light switch. So you have to start with a little kindling and start with a little tinder and start to, grow. What I'm saying is you have to start locally and you have to change your mindset a little bit. Wow, look at this. Okay, so this might be everything I was trying to say here. But I'm just saying a little shift in your mindset and starting locally, that can start to transform. And as you start to demonstrate to other people around you how to implement this sort of, how you can kind of McDonaldize inclusion in your own life, other people are going to start to pick up on that, and that will start to spread.
Yeah. Exactly. So empowering everyone to be able to do this, to understand this isn't a thing you do every now and then. This is just part of who you are and how you show up in your work, in your life. Understand it's never finished, right? Speaking up as opposed to not speaking up. We've erred way too long on the side of not speaking up. Let's try something different. And just like you're saying, expecting to make mistakes and committing, though, learning, growing, excelling together as we do it. That's what it's all about. So I so appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all and share some of these ideas. Please, I know we didn't get a time for a ton of questions. If you had a question and I wasn't able to answer or address, please do feel free to reach out, connect with me. And I just love, spreading these ideas with y'all and with others. So thank you for the opportunity.
Round of applause for Dr. Michael Barron. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. This was absolutely phenomenal. Awesome. Yeah, and we will see you guys next week for another great episode. Coolest Place to Be every Thursday at noon. We'll see you guys soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Nick.